Greetings, humans of the internet, and welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. I, of course, am your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you, as usual, from my undisclosed location in Midwest USA with some more historical insights. And continuing on last week's topic of rivers, which were called the first highways, I figured it would be a good time to discuss the history of the American highway system, which is somewhat ironic because I am in the part of the country that is currently and an advisory for winter storms. And my part of the country is expecting 6 inches of snow tomorrow, and I'm not sure about Sunday, but at least tomorrow. I hope that wherever my listeners are experiencing better weather. But anyway, back to the history of the American highway system, because it is quite a story to say the least. So please buckle up, pardon the pun, as we drive on into the history of the American highway system. Now, like with many major stepping stones in American history, we have the automobile, not very surprisingly, to thank for the American highway system. Now, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, automobiles were a novelty that could only be afforded by the very wealthy. Most Americans contented themselves with either using the horse and buggy or taking railroad cars when they needed to go on long trips. Getting around in large cities was fairly easy due to networks of streetcars and subways and everything being relatively close. And I know it may sound a bit odd, but it was generally thought that automobiles would never catch on. As automobiles came into power, the demand for good quality roads was growing. Roads at the time were little more than repurposed wagon trails. In fact, many of the major highways were actually vestiges of old trails such as the Oregon Trail or Santa Fe Trail. There were paved highways, but most were cobblestone and almost all were in major cities. Good road organizations appeared to remedy this situation. AAA and the Automobile Club of Southern California were formed in California to promote better roads. Additionally, many trail associations were created to address the need of having marked highways. This was the birth of named highways. Prior to 1912, many roads had unofficial names, often being called the name of the towns that it connected. In 1912, that changed with the idea to build a cross-country highway between San Francisco, California, and New York City. And this new highway would be called the Lincoln Highway. It was one of the earliest transcontinental highways for automobiles across the United States of America. It was conceived in 1912 by an Indiana businessman named Carl G. Fisher, and it was formally dedicated on October 31st, 1913. Most of the construction was finished in the late 1920s, and the Lincoln Highway ran coast to coast from Times Square in New York City and west to Lincoln Park in San Francisco. Originally through 13 states, the states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and California. And in 1915, the Colorado Loop was removed, and in 1928, a realignment relocated the Lincoln Highway through the northern tip of West Virginia. The first officially recorded length of the entire Lincoln Highway was made in 1913, and it was over 3,000 miles. Over the years, the road was improved and numerous realignments were made, and by 1924, the highway had been shortened to 3,142 miles, compared to the original 3,389 miles. The Lincoln Highway would gradually be replaced by the U.S. numbered highway system in 1926, with most of the route becoming Route 30 from Pennsylvania to Wyoming, and U.S. routes 40 and 50 in the west. West of Fallon, Nevada, the Lincoln Highway was split into 2 different routes to San Francisco. The southern route followed roughly what is now U.S. Route 50 through Carson City, Nevada, Sacramento, California, and on to San Francisco. The northern route from Fallon, Nevada mostly followed what is now Interstate 80 and US 40 through Reno, Nevada, Sacramento, California, Oakland, California, and San Francisco. I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little bit lower and raspier than usual. My microphone is acting a little bit funny, and I'm afraid if I raise my voice above this volume, it may blow out the mic. But anyway, back to the highways. And after the Lincoln Highway, many other named highways came along, such as the Yellowstone Trail, the River Road, the Ukiah-Tahoe Trail, and countless others. And I'm sure some of you are wondering how exactly these early roads were constructed. Well, there were a number of ways, one of which was a plank road, which, as you can probably tell, is simply a road made out of wooden planks or heavy timber. This idea goes back to the 1840s when wagon trails. Plank roads were used in areas of mud or soft dirt where normal dirt roads would not hold up for use by heavy wagons. In 1912, a road was proposed from San Diego, California to Phoenix, Arizona, along the Algodones, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, dunes in Southern California. This was an area of shifting sand dunes where a standard road would not work. In 1915, a highway builder named Ed Fletcher came up with an idea to use plank roads for vehicles across the dunes. In 1915, the first planks were put up in place. This early version of the plank road was built with two parallel planks, each about 25 inches wide, one for the left side wheel and the other for the right side wheel. And this 6.5-mile long plank road was finished in April of 1915. The road was considered a success, and in June of 1915, the California State Highway Commission assumed responsibility for the plank road. However, techniques for road building did become better in the future, well then the future, now the past of course, and the named highway system would eventually be left behind in favor of the numbered highway system, which was established in 1926. The numbering system followed a grid by generally using even-numbered routes running east to west, with low numbers starting in the north and odd-number routes running north to south with low numbers starting in the east. The late 30s saw a new development in highways, and that, of course, was tolls. Now, modern toll roads are turnpikes, bridges, and tunnels. The first turnpike opened in 1940, and it was the Pennsylvania Turnpike. In 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge opened across the Golden Gate entry into San Francisco Bay and started charging 40 cents for toll each direction. Today, most toll roads are in the eastern United States, but toll bridges and tunnels are everywhere else. There are also toll express lanes on some interstate highways, especially in congested areas. 1940s also saw the beginning of the freeway system, and anyone wondering what that is, you've probably seen the word many times. It is an express highway, especially one with controlled access. Shortly after World War II ended, this new philosophy and design of bypassing cities and towns with controlled access using overpasses with on and off ramps started to gain momentum. The early freeways were in metropolitan areas and in most cases were bypasses around cities and towns. Up to this point, the idea was to connect cities and towns, and the highway was often the main street of the town, with stores along Main Street and houses along the streets each side of Main Street. However, by the 1950s, this philosophy began to change, and the idea was to now have freeways even between towns. Drivers would get on the freeway and travel at higher speeds, only needing to pull off into towns for gas and food and lodging. And that now brings us to the interstate highway system, of course. And for that, we have President Dwight D. Eisenhower to thank. On June 29, 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the legislation funding the construction of the U.S. interstate highway system, something Americans had dreamed of since Detroit, Michigan first started building cars. President Eisenhower is widely regarded as the man who helped create the interstate highway system. His motivations for a highway network stemmed from three main events: his assignment as a military observer to the first transcontinental motor convoy, his experience in World War II, where he observed the efficiencies of the German Autobahn, and the Soviet Union's 1953 detonation of the hydrogen bomb, which instigated a fear that insufficient roads would keep Americans from being able to escape a nuclear disaster. Let us look at the event that happened in 1919 first of all. In the summer of 1919, when Dwight Eisenhower was still a lieutenant colonel, he narrowly missed out on overseas service during World War I and anticipated a reduction in rank as the Army shrank and prepared for peacetime operations. Adding to his discontent, he was physically separated from his wife and young child because of a shortage of military housing. He was assigned as an observer to the unprecedented military experiment, the first transcontinental motor convoy. The operation was a road test for military vehicles and was used to identify the challenges in moving troops from coast to coast on the existing infrastructure. The excursion covered 3,200 miles from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. It included 79 vehicles of all sizes and 297 military personnel. During the expedition, Eisenhower gained some insight for the creation of a network of connected roads and bridges. His report to Army leaders focused mostly on mechanical difficulties and the condition of the patchwork of existing roads. He reported a mix of paved and unpaved roads, old bridges, and narrow passages. Narrow roads caused oncoming traffic to run off the road and encounter added difficulty in re-entering. Some bridges were too low for trucks to pass under. Eisenhower pointed out that roads in the Midwestern region of the United States were impractical, but the roads in the East were sufficient for truck use. Eisenhower singled out a western section of the pre-mentioned Lincoln Highway as being so poor that it warranted a thorough investigation before government money should be expended. He praised California for having excellent paved roads, and lastly, he observed that different grades of road determined much of the convoy success. During World War II, when Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander, he was the architect of the defeat of Nazi Germany. As Allied armies raced across France and into Germany, he marveled at the vast highway system built by the Germans prior to World War II. This advanced European highway system helped the Allies. The Autobahn aided the Allied victory by enabling Allies to efficiently resupply forces that pursued the German Wehrmacht across France and into Germany. The famous Red Ball Express was a magnificent achievement that kept swift-moving Allied armies resupplied. In August and September of 1944, an around-the-clock operation of 6,000 trucks delivered material to the forces on the move. It involved a 300-mile divided road that eventually converted into a superhighway. The road extended from the Normandy beachhead to terminals near Paris, and later a second superhighway extended from Paris into Germany. The Cold War played a major role in the creation of the interstate highway. Shortly after Eisenhower took office in 1953, Joseph Stalin died, setting off a power struggle in the Kremlin. And it was not until September that Nikita Khrushchev emerged as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And on August 12, 1953, the Russians exploded their first hydrogen bomb, thus moving closer to the United States in nuclear war. It was unsettling to have a superpower with an unstable government armed with the latest nuclear weapons technology. The event even further jolted an already rattled U.S. public, which routinely engaged in civil defense drills. In a July 1954 speech to the Governor's Conference, Vice President Richard Nixon expressed concern over the appalling inadequacies of the existing U.S. road infrastructure and its ability to meet the needs for responding to a national emergency on the scale of atomic war. Nixon mentioned atomic war no less than 10 times in the speech. Now, a large-scale urban evacuation drill occurred in June 1955, and it drove home the importance of an evacuation. The ensuing confusion, mixed with the crowded evacuation route, seemed to make President Eisenhower's case for the IHS. The administration was serious about the will of a uniform system of roads for national defense and directed Department of Defense involvement. When the interstate highway system began, a testing facility was created in central Illinois to evaluate pavement, road standards, and construction techniques, among others. The DoD contributed equipment and personnel for the test. Military leaders knew from their experiences in the 2 previous world wars that roads were vital to national defense. During World War I, military truck traffic destroyed roads, and in World War II, defense plants were often supplied by truck, but the lack of road standards sometimes impeded timely delivery. Over a 2-year period, Army trucks drove 17 million miles on test roads. Some vehicles carried blocks of concrete in an effort to see how long a 24-ton truck would take to destroy roads and bridges. Highway building and maintenance standards were developed from the test. Congress passed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which created funds for interstate highway construction. As the IHS developed, so did its ability to support national defense. For example, throughout the system, mile-long stretches of concrete pavement doubled as emergency landing strips for military aircraft. Many Army posts, especially where division-level units are garrisoned, are near interstate highways, and people have been driving ever since. And with that, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap up, and we have learned a lot today. For one thing, we have learned that the military had a role in developing the interstate highway. And I would also like to thank the people at Army.mil, gbcnet.com, and historicushighways.com for the information used to make this episode. Now goodbye, God bless, and happy driving.